In this article, they say we hear Miss Pelt summoned a butler to the master bathroom after she discovered drops of urine on the toilet seat. She demanded the butler clean it up, which he did, although she then insisted that he clean the toilet seat again. And again. It was only after he'd cleaned the seat 4 times, one more for luck,
What happens when a last name isn't enough anymore? When you grow up inside one of the most famous families on the planet, and then suddenly find yourself looking like the outsider in someone else's empire. Because right now, the internet is asking one brutal question. Has Brooklyn Beckham just been publicly humiliated inside the very family he chose over his own? From red carpets to billion-dollar boardrooms, from dynasty royalty to awkward silence at elite dinner tables, something feels off. Very off. Once upon a time, Brooklyn stood at the center of the Beckham legacy. Cameras flashing. Brand deals lining up. The golden son of football and fashion royalty. But fast forward to today, whispers are getting louder, cold body language. Strategic silence. Power shifts happening behind closed doors. And suddenly, people are wondering, did Nicola's powerful family quietly turn the tables? Was this love, or a calculated relocation into a world where Brooklyn isn't the headline? Here's the footnote. Because when billionaires go quiet, it's never random. And if the rumors are even half true, this isn't just family drama. This is a power reset. And Brooklyn might not be the one in control, because here's the part nobody wants to say out loud. When Brooklyn walked away from the Beckham dynasty, he didn't just switch families. He switched power systems. And those systems, they don't operate on emotion. They operate on hierarchy. Let's zoom out for a second. On one side, you have a household built by global fame. Years of branding, discipline, strategic image control. The kind of family where every post, every appearance, every word has weight. On the other side, billionaire boardrooms, corporate dominance, precision, cold calculation. A world where influence isn't posted, it's exercised. And somewhere in between all that polished wealth and generational power, stands Brooklyn. Not as the golden boy, not as the next empire builder, but as the variable. And in elite circles, variables are dangerous. Now, insiders aren't screaming scandals. No dramatic public speeches. No messy interviews. That's not how powerful families move. Instead, it's the silence. The kind of silence that makes you uncomfortable. Observers started noticing small things first. Subtle social shifts. The way Nicola remains firmly anchored in her family's orbit. Always surrounded, always supported, always positioned. While Brooklyn, he seems adjacent, present, but not central. And when you've grown up as the center of attention, adjacency feels different. Very different. Let's talk about perception. In the Beckham world, Brooklyn was part of a legacy machine. Even if he experimented with careers photography, cooking, branding, the family name carried gravity. Doors opened. Rooms shifted. People paid attention. But in the Peltz universe, that gravity doesn't automatically transfer. Because when billions are involved, fame isn't currency. Control is. And that's where whispers begin. Some insiders describe private gatherings where business conversations flow effortlessly around the table. Market strategies, investments, corporate takeovers, high-level negotiations. And then there's Brooklyn, smiling, listening, occasionally nodding, but not steering, not influencing, not commanding. Now, is that humiliation? Not in the loud, dramatic, reality TV sense. But in elite power culture, being the least powerful person in the room can feel louder than any insult. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. For years, critics joked that Brooklyn was finding himself. Trying this, trying that. Photography 1 month, chef branding the next, lifestyle influencer after that. Back then, it felt experimental, charming, even. But when you're surrounded by a billionaire family known for ruthless business focus, finding yourself starts to look like drifting. Again, no one's publicly saying this. But body language tells stories words won't. Event photos, seating arrangements, who speaks first, who people listen to, who people wait for. And suddenly, social media detectives are asking, has Brooklyn gone from heir of a global brand to supporting character in someone else's empire? Let's not ignore another factor. Power families protect their own. Nicola grew up in that environment. Structured, guarded, strategically positioned. She didn't relocate into the Beckham ecosystem. Brooklyn relocated into hers. That's a massive psychological shift. Because when you move into someone else's power structure, you adapt. You adjust. You learn where you stand. And sometimes, that position isn't as high as you expected. There's also the uncomfortable optics. When tensions between Brooklyn and his parents escalated, observers expected public solidarity from his new circle. Grand gestures, loud backing, clear positioning. Instead, measured quiet, which can either mean stability or strategic distance. And when powerful families choose distance, it's rarely accidental. Now here's the twist nobody predicted. Instead of Brooklyn appearing empowered and liberated, some analysts argue he looks smaller, less vocal, less dominant, more reactive than proactive. And in elite social ecosystems, perception becomes reality fast. Because power isn't just about money. It's about who commands the room, who sets the tone, who everyone subtly defers to. And right now, that doesn't appear to be Brooklyn. Let's be very clear. There's no evidence of dramatic confrontations. No screaming matches caught on camera. No explosive public humiliation moment. But sometimes humiliation isn't loud. Sometimes it's subtle. It's being tolerated instead of celebrated. It's being introduced as Nicola's husband instead of Brooklyn Beckham. It's watching billion-dollar conversations unfold while you search for your role in them. And if that shift feels small to regular people, in legacy families, it's seismic. Because when you've grown up as football royalty's son, stepping into a room where that royalty means very little, that hits differently. The real tension might not be between families anymore. It might be internal. Identity versus expectation. Legacy versus reinvention. Brand vs belonging. And here's the question circling quietly behind every polished Instagram post. Did Brooklyn leave one power structure thinking he'd finally be independent, only to discover independence inside another empire works very differently? Because freedom sounds glamorous, until you realize power still has layers. And you're not at the top. And the deeper this story goes, the clearer one thing becomes. This isn't about shouting. It's about positioning. It's about influence. It's about where Brooklyn actually stands when the cameras turn off and the billionaires stop smiling. And if the social shifts continue the way they are, this might not be a loud public collapse. It might be something colder, slower, strategic, and far more uncomfortable. And trust me, we're just getting started. And just when people thought the tension couldn't get any thicker, it did. Because what started as whispers about adjustment inside a powerful family slowly turned into something much more layered. Let's talk about proximity. In high-profile families, proximity equals power. Who sits next to whom at private dinners? Who gets introduced first? Whose opinion gets asked for, and whose gets acknowledged politely before the conversation moves on? Observers who follow elite social dynamics started noticing something subtle but impossible to ignore. Brooklyn wasn't leading rooms. He wasn't even influencing them. He was orbiting. And orbiting is dangerous when you're used to being the sun. There were events, private, ultra-exclusive gatherings, where business leaders, investors, and social heavyweights filled the room. Conversations revolved around strategy, acquisitions, partnerships. The kind of talk that moves markets. Nicola fit in seamlessly. Confident. Fluent in that world. Comfortable. Brooklyn? Smiling. Supportive. But quiet. Now silence can mean maturity, but it can also mean displacement. And displacement hits differently when your entire upbringing revolved around brand control and dominance. Let's rewind. For years, critics questioned Brooklyn's direction. Photography exhibitions, cooking tutorials, limited edition sauce launches, lifestyle campaigns. Each move came with massive visibility, but also raised eyebrows. In the Beckham orbit, experimentation was protected by legacy. In the Peltz orbit, results matter. Consistency matters. Focus matters. So when Brooklyn continued exploring creative lanes without a defined empire of his own, some insiders allegedly started asking an uncomfortable question. What exactly does he bring to the table here? Now nobody publicly said that. But in elite environments, you don't need public criticism. You feel it in pauses. You feel it in tone shifts. You feel it when conversations glide around you instead of toward you. And here's where the word humiliated begins to morph. Because humiliation doesn't always look like shouting or insults. Sometimes it's structural. It's realizing your last name carries less leverage in this new world. It's recognizing that influence is inherited differently here. Let's address the elephant in the room. Brooklyn left a dynasty. The Beckham name isn't just famous, it's strategically managed. For decades, discipline and image built an empire that blends sport, fashion, and branding into one polished machine. Leaving that machine wasn't small. It was seismic. But what many didn't anticipate was this. When you detach from one empire, you don't automatically become powerful in another. You become transitional. And transitional status inside billionaire circles? That's unstable territory. There were also subtle digital signs. Social media used to feel like a joint narrative. Unified, coordinated, strong. Recently, more separate. More independent branding from Nicola. More reactive posts from Brooklyn. Less synchronized energy. And in celebrity ecosystems, that matters. Because image is everything. And when your image starts to look unanchored while your partner looks strategically positioned, speculation explodes. Now let's talk about one particularly awkward moment insiders referenced. A private dinner where business moguls were present. A room filled with financial strategy talk. Long-term projections. Expansion conversations. An anonymous attendee allegedly described Brooklyn as pleasant but peripheral. Peripheral. That word stuck. Because peripheral isn't powerful. Peripheral is polite presence. Peripheral is tolerated. Peripheral is background. And when you've grown up center stage, background feels like exile. Here's where things get psychologically intense. Identity collapse is subtle. When your childhood was defined by global fame and protective infrastructure, stepping into a world where you're evaluated differently can shake foundations. In the Beckham structure, Brooklyn was legacy. In the Pelt structure, his performance. And performance is measured. Coldly. Without nostalgia. There's also another layer people are whispering about. Influence over narrative. When Brooklyn publicly distanced himself from his parents, it looked bold. Independent. Empowered. But as months passed, some observers began asking, if this was about autonomy, why does he look less autonomous now? Why does every major move feel embedded within his wife's orbit? Why does his public presence feel smaller, not bigger? Because here's the uncomfortable twist. Breaking free is glamorous in theory, but sustaining independence requires infrastructure. And if your infrastructure now belongs to someone else's family, the power dynamic shifts quietly. Now, no one is claiming overt control. No secret contracts. No dramatic ultimatums. But high-power families operate on expectation alignment. Shared values. Shared objectives. Shared ambition. And if you're still figuring things out while everyone around you is executing billion-dollar strategies, you feel it, even if no one says it. Then came the social distancing from his original support system. Fewer visible interactions. Fewer warm public crossovers. And suddenly, Brooklyn looked like a man who burned a bridge, only to discover the other side isn't fully his either. That's not scandal. That's isolation. And isolation in elite environments is brutal. Because without strong positioning, you drift. Now here's the psychological bombshell. Some behavioral analysts watching the situation noted a shift in Brooklyn's body language over time. Earlier interviews, playful, loose, comfortable. Recent appearances, more guarded, more measured, less spontaneous. Now body language interpretation isn't science, but perception shapes narrative. And narrative shapes reputation. And reputation inside billionaire ecosystems, that's currency. There's also the financial subtext. When a marriage includes significant wealth disparity and strong protective structures, power balances are delicate. If one partner enters an already fortified empire, their leverage depends on contribution. And if contribution feels unclear, speculation intensifies. People start asking brutal questions. Is he building something sustainable? Or is he floating? Is he shaping influence? Or adjusting to it? And perhaps the most uncomfortable question of all, if tomorrow he wanted to stand independently again, could he? Because independence isn't emotional. It's structural. And right now, structurally, he appears deeply embedded inside one powerful orbit, with limited visible anchors outside it. That's not loud humiliation. That's strategic overshadowing. And overshadowing in elite families is quiet, calculated, almost invisible, until you step back and see the pattern. The son of global icons now positioned as the quieter half of a billionaire household. The once central heir now peripheral in high-stakes rooms. The man who declared freedom now operating within a different hierarchy. And if that isn't dramatic enough, just wait. Because the real tension isn't social. It's what happens when perception solidifies. And once elite circles label you as peripheral, climbing back to center stage becomes very, very difficult. And this is where the story stops being social and starts becoming strategic. Because perception inside elite families doesn't just stay inside drawing rooms. It spreads. Quietly. Through networks. Through investors. Through high-level circles where reputation isn't gossip, it's leverage. And right now, the biggest risk for Brooklyn isn't a shouting match. It's branding erosion. When powerful people start seeing you as unstable, inconsistent, or emotionally reactive, doors don't slam shut. They just don't open. And that's colder. Let's talk consequences. In celebrity culture, drama boosts relevance. In billionaire culture, drama lowers value. If you're seen as someone who publicly fractures family ties, critics start wondering, is he unpredictable? Is he impulsive? Is he strategically reliable? Again, no one says it out loud. But elite ecosystems are built on risk assessment. And reputation is part of that calculation. Now imagine this scenario. Private investors considering partnerships. Luxury brands evaluating long-term ambassadors. High-level collaborators analyzing personal stability. If your name carries unresolved family conflict headlines, you become complicated. Not toxic, but complicated. And complicated is expensive. There's also the silent psychological toll. When you detach from your original support system, siblings, childhood anchors, familiar structure, you remove emotional cushioning. And if tensions ever surface in your new orbit, you don't have a neutral fallback. You have one ecosystem, one power center, one anchor. That's pressure, massive pressure. Because even the strongest marriages struggle under isolation. Now imagine that marriage existing inside billionaire scrutiny, where image, alliances, and public narrative are constantly evaluated. If everything note perfect, it looks glamorous. If even small cracks appear, the imbalance becomes visible fast. Here's where the word humiliated evolves one more time. Not because someone yelled, not because someone insulted him publicly, but because power imbalance can be humiliating without anyone raising their voice. Imagine walking into rooms where your partner's family controls the conversation, the investments, the influence. Imagine knowing your own original empire is watching from a distance. Imagine realizing reconciliation would require humility on a global stage. That's not simple pride. That's identity at war with itself. And identity crises at this level? They don't trend for a week. They reshape futures. Now let's consider something even more uncomfortable. What if this isn't about either family winning? What if it's about Brooklyn slowly discovering that stepping away from one dynasty didn't automatically make him the architect of his own? What if he's in a transition phase that has no clear blueprint? Because reinvention is brutal. Especially when the world watches every move, every facial expression, every event absence, every social media caption. People are analyzing timelines now, comparing past confidence to present composure, noticing who stands front and center in photographs, who speaks, who leads, who follows. And once the internet starts building that narrative, it sticks. There's also the long-term question nobody wants to touch. What happens 5 years from now? If his ventures don't crystallize into something definitive? If public perception settles into supporting character instead of independent force, reputation calcifies. And rebuilding authority after that? Twice as hard. Because power families don't respond emotionally. They respond structurally. If they sense instability, they fortify. If they sense unpredictability, they distance. And if they sense someone doesn't align with long-term strategic optics, they quietly reposition them. No drama. Just adjustment. That's why this situation feels so tense. Because nothing explosive has technically happened. No lawsuits. No screaming interviews. No public denouncements. Just subtle shifts. And subtle shifts inside elite hierarchies can be louder than scandals. Let's zoom out even further. The Beckham empire was built on relentless discipline and synchronized branding. The Peltz empire was built on calculated dominance and financial precision. Two entirely different philosophies. One rooted in global celebrity control. One rooted in corporate control. Brooklyn stepped between them. And now? He appears suspended between two systems that operate very differently. If he moves back toward reconciliation, critics will say he retreated. If he doubles down on independence inside his new orbit, critics will say he surrendered leverage. It's a psychological chessboard. And every move has narrative consequences. But here's the most dramatic possibility of all. What if the real humiliation isn't external? What if it's internal realization? The moment when someone understands they traded one hierarchy for another. The moment when they question whether freedom felt the way they imagined it would. The moment when they realize influence isn't inherited twice. It's earned, again, from scratch. And earning authority inside billionaire ecosystems, that's a different sport entirely. Because love might open doors, but contribution keeps them open. And if Brooklyn is still defining that contribution, the clock is ticking. The internet isn't waiting. Elite circles aren't pausing. Narratives solidify quickly. Right now, he stands at a crossroads. Reinvention or reduction. Authority or adjacency. Architect or accessory. And the world is watching. Not for drama, but for positioning. Because once you publicly step away from one dynasty, you better be building your own. Otherwise, history doesn't label you bold. It labels you absorbed. And in high-power legacies, being absorbed is the quietest form of humiliation of all. So the question isn't whether Nicola's family turned against him. The question is deeper. Has Brooklyn fully secured his place in the empire he chose? Or is he still negotiating where he stands? Because if the whispers keep growing, if the optics don't shift, if perception continues hardening, this won't explode. It will settle into something colder, a permanent repositioning. And once that happens, climbing back to center stage won't just require confidence. It will require strategy. And maybe a brand new identity. So now the real question isn't what happened. It's what happens next. Does Brooklyn rise and prove every whisper wrong? Does he build something so powerful, so undeniable, that nobody ever calls him peripheral again? Or does this quiet repositioning slowly turn into a permanent role? Because history is brutal. It doesn't remember intentions. It remembers outcomes. Right now, we're watching a man who walked away from one global dynasty, trying to solidify his place inside another. Was it love? Was it independence? Was it strategy? Or was it a gamble that hasn't fully paid off yet? And here's the twist. Power families don't lose sleep over headlines, but they do calculate optics. And if perception continues shifting the way it has, this story might not end with drama. It might end with a silent redefinition of Brooklyn Beckham's entire legacy. So what do you think? Is he being quietly overshadowed? Or is this just the calm before his biggest comeback? Did he trade legacy for freedom? Or security for uncertainty? Drop your thoughts below. I'm reading every single one. And if you want more deep dives into the power games happening behind celebrity smiles, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because trust me, this story, it's far from over.